Speaking into the void. Here we go. This is chapter 7 of Nazis and the Occult. Tibetan Wisdom Meets German Folly, which is kind of a misleading title, in my opinion. So this title's a little misleading, and a further exploration of Nazis and their interest in Tibet is probably worth exploring. What this chapter is mostly about is Rudolf Hess and Karl Haushofer. Karl Haushofer could be considered the godfather of geopolitics and intelligence operations, as we'll see in this chapter. In 1944, he was also part of a plot to assassinate Hitler, along with his son Albrecht Haushofer. Rudolf Hess was one of Hitler's closest confidants, and it was rumored that they had an unnatural bond with one another. Perhaps it was after Hess was humiliated by going to the UK that his bond was completely broken. He went at Karl Haushofer's insistence and was discredited almost immediately. What is interesting is that the UK also had its fair share of occultists at the time. In fact, this was a thing that was really gripping the Western world. And one wonders if Karl Haushofer set Hess up for his fall from grace. And so here's Rudolf Hess. And without further ado, here we go. Tibetan wisdom meets German folly. Our meeting had hardly begun when my stormtroopers, as they became from that day forth, attacked. Like wolves, they flung themselves upon the enemy in packs of 8 and 10. How many of these men I never really knew until that day, and their head was gallant Rudolf, my personal secretary, Hess. Hitler, Mein Kampf. And here's a picture of them together. And in fact, if you've done any kind of research into Nazis, you know that they also were kind of fond of cross-dressing, which I have an image here. That's a whole book that you could read yourself about that. There's a photo book that was put together about it. So let's go ahead and read this chapter. Rudolf Hess has been painted by historians as weak and indecisive, characterless, passive, putty in the hands of a stronger man, eager to be rid of his personal identity, to give up his freedom to think and feel for himself to a totalitarian cause. In short, the perfect disciple, loyal and obedient to the death. As Hitler's deputy, he must have enjoyed his dependency on the Führer. Like Hitler, Hess had a penchant for occultism, having been steeped in it from his birth in Egypt, which I find very interesting that, I didn't know that before reading this, that Rudolf Hess was in fact born in Egypt. Born on April 26th, 1896, to a prosperous Bavarian wholesaler and exporter who had transplanted himself to Alexandria, Rudolf lived with his family there until his 14th year and then was sent to school in Germany. So we also see someone who was from a class of people who was pretty wealthy and became part of the activist class over there in Germany. As soon as World War I started, he volunteered and was placed in the 1st Company of the 16th Bavarian Infantry Regiment, named the List Regiment, after its original commander. He was an officer in the same regiment as Hitler, who was a dispatch runner, but they never met then. The List Regiment was in the thick of the fighting at the front. According to a letter which Hitler wrote to his old Munich landlord, they lost 2,900 men in 4 days. Hess was wounded twice. When the war ended, Hess was 22. He went back to Munich and joined the Tool Society, which we've covered in previous chapters. He was one of the hundreds of veterans smuggled out of Munich by Sabotendorf, along with money and arms, to join the Free Corps. Despite his hangdog look, he had a reputation for being a scrappy street fighter. He participated wholeheartedly with the Free Corps in ridding Munich of the leftist revolutionaries. Hess was in the audience when Hitler came to the German Workers' Party meetings to deliver his grandiose plans for the future of the movement, predicting that the day would come when the banner of our movement will fly over the Reichstag, over the castle in Berlin, yes, over every German house. Seeing the small audience and pale, gesticulating speaker, Hess wondered, as he later reported, was this thundering orator foolish, or was he the Messiah? Soon his mind was made up. As a student at the University of Munich, he was eligible to apply for a prize which a wealthy South American had endowed. I wonder if they were Argentinian or Brazilian. A lot of them ended up there. Competitors were to write a theme that posed the question, how must the man be constituted who will lead Germany back to her old heights? Delirious with the messianic hope of the time, Hess won. Drawing a word portrait of Hitler, he wrote, quote, profound knowledge in all areas of political life and history, the capacity to draw the right lessons from this knowledge, belief in the purity of his own cause and in ultimate victory, and enormous power of will give him the power of thrilling oratory which evokes joyful enthusiasm from the masses. Where the salvation of the nation is in question, he does not disdain utilizing the weapons of the adversary, slogans, processions, etc. Where all authority has vanished, only a man of the people can establish authority. This was shown in the case of Mussolini. The deeper the dictator was originally rooted in the broad masses, the better he understands how to treat them psychologically. The less the workers will distrust him, the more supporters he will win among these most energetic ranks of the people. He himself has nothing in common with the masses. He is all personality, like every great man. If necessity commands it, he does not shrink from shedding blood. Great questions are always decided by blood and iron. And the question at stake is, shall we rise or be destroyed? Parliament may go babbling or not, the man acts. It transpires that despite his many speeches, he knows how to keep silent. Perhaps his own supporters are the most keenly disappointed. In order to reach his goal, he is prepared to trample on his closest friends. And so what I think Hess is describing here is a cult leader. Let's continue. This is still the quote. For the sake of the great ultimate goal, he must be willing temporarily to appear a traitor against the nation in the eyes of the majority. The lawgiver proceeds with terrible hardness. He knows the people and their influential individuals. As the need arises, he can trample them with the boots of a grenadier, or with cautious and sensitive fingers spin threads reaching as far as the Pacific Ocean. And we'll see later in this chapter a little bit of the relationship with Japan that they build. In either case, the treaties of enslavement will fall. One day we shall have our new greater Germany, embracing all those who are of German blood. Thus we have the portrait of the dictator, keen of mind, clear and true, passionate, and then again controlled, cold, and bold, scrupulous in decision, fearless in rapid execution of his acts, ruthless towards himself and others, mercilessly hard, and then again soft in his love for his people, tireless in work with a steel fist in a velvet glove, capable ultimately of overcoming even himself. I think that's kind of interesting, this double, the steel fist in a glove, right? This sort of reminds me of all kind of like occult practices, this sort of alchemical blending of two opposites. capable ultimately of overcoming even himself. We still do not know when he will intervene to save us, this man, but millions feel that he is coming. End quote. By November 8th, 1923, this man had made his presence known to all of Germany. Hitler had already seized control of the Nazi Party and now planned to seize control of the Bavarian government as well. Hess, intoxicated with this newly discovered messiah, marched along with Hitler in the Munich beer hall putsch of 1923. And so this is them, I guess, preparing for it. And here's an image I found of the Nazi paramilitary troops participating in the beer hall putsch of November. It took place over the 8th and the 9th of 1923. And of course, we have the fun numerology here, which I never know if it's purposeful or not, but 11-9 would be, if you multiply it, 88, which is HH, and a dog whistle of neo-Nazis anyway. So I think the numerology there is interesting. Despite its traumatic effect, the putsch was a fiasco. When people opened fire on the marching stormtroopers, Hitler was the first to flee. He did not mention this in Mein Kampf, but said of the meeting, "My stormtroopers, as they became from that day forth attacked. Like wolves, they flung themselves upon the enemy in packs of 8 and 10. How many of these men I never knew until that day. And at their head was gallant Rudolf, my personal secretary, Hess." Hess escaped across the border into Austria over a mountain pass. Hitler was imprisoned at Landsberg, a town west of Munich. The punishment was very mild, lasting less than 9 months, and Hitler spoke of it afterward as a much-needed vacation. Hess proved his devotion to Hitler by coming back from Austria, giving himself up, and joining Hitler in prison in room number 7. So steadfast was that devotion, in fact, that Ernst Hanfstaengl hints at an unnatural relationship. It is probably not true to say there was a physical homosexual relationship between the two, but in a passive way, the attraction was there. I certainly did not trust the manhood of either. And indeed, we have these pretty infamous pictures of cross-dressing Nazis. Shared prison life served to bind the two men together until a later fiasco severed the bond. Hess became Hitler's secretary and helped him with Mein Kampf. Hess did more than take dictation and type the manuscript. As the best educated of Hitler's disciples, he was able to provide Hitler with useful information, particularly on a new study which was called Geopolitics. He introduced Hitler to the professor and ex-general from whom he had learned about geopolitics, and in fact the professor was a frequent visitor to Landsberg prison. Some people indeed believe that the professor, Karl Haushofer, was Hitler's guiding brain. And I think that's a fair assessment to make. Here's an image of Karl. So we're going to learn a little bit about him today. Writing in Current History and Forum in June 1941, Frederick Sondern, Jr., who had personal knowledge of the subject, reported, quote, "Dr. Haushofer and his men dominate Hitler's thinking. That domination began 17 years ago when the World War general flattened the ex-corporal by paying him visits in prison. Haushofer saw possibilities in the hysterical agitator who had launched an unsuccessful beer hall revolution." And we're going to find out that he was very instrumental in sort of forming this intelligence committee. And one really does wonder if he set both Hess and Hitler up for failure. It's an interesting proposition, and he was very much an occultist. The prison visits became frequent. The distinguished soldier scientist fascinated Hitler, then finally made him a disciple. The ascendancy has grown as Dr. Haushofer again and again has proved the accuracy of his knowledge and the wisdom of his advice. It was Haushofer who taught the hysterical, plainless agitator in a Munich jail to think in terms of continents and empires. Haushofer virtually dedicated the famous chapter of Mein Kampf, which outlined the foreign policy Hitler has since followed to the letter. End quote. Haushofer's living space theory sought to justify Germany's world conquest by claiming it was necessary to ensure the German people room to preserve and expand their racial community. He developed an intelligence-gathering organization which became the envy and the model for all others. So I wrote that in my little blurb. He is really responsible, I think, for modern intelligence operations. He was called everything from Hitler's idea man to the man who will, in the end, take the Führer's place. Yet he seems to have kept a very low profile. But there is apparently much more to Haushofer than the geopolitician. A love affair with the Orient began in 1908. And here I do have a picture of him. Here's a book that he wrote about Japan. And then here's an image of him in Yukata in Kyushu. So, a love affair with the Orient began in 1908, when, as a field artillery officer in the Bavarian army, he was sent to Tokyo to study the Japanese army and to advise it as an artillery instructor. The assignment changed the course of his life. He traveled extensively in the Far East and added the Japanese, Korean, and Chinese languages to his repertoire of English, French, and Russian. So he was a super intelligent man who could speak a lot of languages and perhaps really did manipulate Hitler and Hess to ruin. I think it's an interesting idea to think about. So let's see here. Where did I lost my place a little bit. Okay. He could not be accused, as other leading Nazis were, of having a provincial background. His 4-year sojourn in the Far East also changed the course of German history. Haushofer was able to make the acquaintance of influential Japanese and to develop a rapport for the culture which helped account later for the German-Japanese alliance. When he returned to Germany in 1912, he had no reason at all to know that the Chinese proverb of which he was so fond, quote, "He who rides a tiger cannot get off," would one day have particular relevance for him. Haushofer was introduced to Oriental teachings during his stay in the Far East. He had been a devout student of Schopenhauer. And here I have an image of crazy Arthur Schopenhauer. Ah, my goodness. And now he could drink directly from the source. He became sufficiently conversant in Sanskrit to translate several Hindu and Buddhist texts. And according to Ravenscroft, he was an authority on Oriental mysticism, concealing the other side of his nature and activities as a leader of a secret community of initiates, and an authority on every aspect of the secret doctrine. He was in the esoteric stream of Satanism, through which he sought to raise Germany to the pinnacle of world power. So we'll just look at him again, because that's mainly what this chapter is about, him and Hess. And remember, this book is written in the 70s, so we have the following paragraph. The king of Satanists in America today is Anton LaVey, a former circus lion tamer who greatly admires the Nazis. LaVey's book, The Satanic Bible, published in 1969, is dedicated to a puzzling mixture of people, with one entry reading, to Karl Haushofer, a teacher without a classroom. A number of unsupported theories about Haushofer's occult connections are all rejected by his son, Heinz. Haushofer is known to have had a reputation for precognition and a belief in astrology. Johannes Tots adds to these that the belief that he belonged to George Gurdjieff's esoteric circle. Here's an image of him, um, which was as well versed in the difficult exercises of the order of Bektashi dervishes as Sabatendorf was, and that he was also a secret member of the Tool Society. So here's an image of these guys, the Bektashi order. Um, Liszt's publishing house made a German translation of Gurdjieff's biography. Gurdjieff traveled extensively through Asia and may have met Haushofer there. A former disciple of Gurdjieff, Louis Pauwels, believes that Haushofer was a member of one of the most important secret Buddhist societies and was on a mission to restore the Indo-Germanic race, which he believed had originated in Central Asia to its former greatness. If he failed in the mission, he would commit suicide in the traditional Japanese manner. George Ivanovich Gurdjieff was born in 1872 in the Caucasus region of Russia, of Russian, Greek, and Armenian ancestry. Like Madame Blavatsky, and this must be their template here, he claimed to have met members of a hidden brotherhood while traveling in Asia, and they imparted him to the occult tradition. He started school, first in Moscow and then in France, where disciples could open up higher levels of consciousness. An enigmatic figure, he may have been sent to Tibet as a Russian secret agent. He is believed by some people to have been known there as Dorjieff, the name of a man who taught the Dalai Lama. And people really, I said this in a different episode, but people forget that Tibet was a feudal system and that many of its people who were not in this enlightened class of lamas were poor and impoverished and starving. I have been told that there is a striking similarity in early photographs of both men. J. H. Brennan, a writer on occultism, believes that it was in Tibet that Haushofer made Gurdjieff's acquaintance. In any case, whether Haushofer knew him or not, it is clear that Gurdjieff was never a Nazi sympathizer. He and a group of disciples were in Berlin during the height of Nazi power and watched a street parade which he proceeded to satirize. He was about to be hauled off to prison, but was dismissed as a madman. All the same, Haushofer may very well have been imbued with the spirit of Gurdjieff's teaching, which held that men were asleep and that a great effort is needed for some of them to awaken and become, in effect, supermen. Gurdjieff believed in the legend of masters of wisdom, superhuman intelligences who keep a careful watch over the destiny of mankind and intervene whenever human affairs get out of hand. We might know them here in the United States as the Watchers, the sort of conspiracy crowd. And if these entities exist, in my mind, they're probably demonic. Though this legend is common in Central Asia and the Near East, it is likely that Gurdjieff derived it from the order of the Bektashi dervishes. As we will see, it recurred in Nazi mythology. Gurdjieff also believed that he himself was a source of higher energy from which his disciples could draw. I think it's actually kind of the opposite. One of my sort of kooky theories is that these gurus basically take the energy and life source out of their disciples for themselves. He hinted that he was in direct communication with a higher source through which the work for which he was responsible would be able to spread and gain strength in the world, and that an organization of a higher order was being established in the world, which would be able to accept only those who had reached such a stage of spiritual development that they were able to generate higher energies. He believed that his work was evolutionary because it was against the stream of life, that is to say, against nature and against God. And remember, one of the biggest occult ideas or dark occult ideas is to surpass God and become God, become a God, right? Gurdjieff was far from being a Satanist or a racist, but neither was he bound by traditional ideas of morality. And I think what this author means by traditional is Christian. There was an air of the trickster about him, and he could often play the cruel despot, which would appeal to the totalitarian mentality. Powell's, Brennan, and Tots have linked Haushofer's name with another esoteric group, the Vril Society or Luminous Lodge, a secret community of occultists in pre-Nazi Berlin. And indeed, I have an image here that I found from an interesting website. Let me see if anyone's here. I have two people. I've got Oswald and I've got Terry. What is going on, Terry? We must secure a future for the troll race. Okay. And for our children of hair color. Yeah, SS, right? 2 lightning bolts. Carl does look depressed. Great stream for Rosh Hashanah. I wonder if Savitri Devi ever visited Tibet. I bet a lot of them have. Schopenhauer looks crazy. I included this image of him because he looks so crazy here. Um, uh, yeah, of this guy, George Gurdjieff. Sweet little beanie, little Russian hat. Yeah, one should not support the Free Tibet movement. I think they mean, free from the Chinese so that they can reestablish their feudalism. Oswald says Gurdjieff, the only man who wore hats as impressive as his mustache. Become a living god with the power of black magic and EA coding. Well, I have two very interesting guests here in the live stream today, so thank you both for joining us. Terry, I did try to write you an email. I don't know if you still use your Outlook account, but anyway, let me know if you can privately. My email's posted on my channel. Yeah, the Tibetan monks are full of it. All right, let's continue with our reading here of chapter 7. Where was I? Well, here's the Vril. Vril derives from the novel The Coming Race, which has prophetic overtones. It was written by an English occultist who is better known as the author of The Last Days of Pompeii, Baron Edward Bulwer Lytton. Here's an image of that guy. Written in the 19th century, The Coming Race details a superhuman subterranean race of beings living in huge caves in the bowels of the earth, who have developed a kind of psychic energy, vril, with which they are made the equals of the gods. They plan one day to take control of the earth and bring about a mutation among the existing human elite, subjugating, of course, the rest of slavish society or humanity. One wonders if that's already occurred with certain events. Anyway, Baron Lytton himself presumably believed that he was a storer of vril. He practiced ceremonial magic and was acclaimed by Madame Blavatsky to be a theosophist. Although he had examined mesmerism, he denied that vril had anything to do with animal magnetism. It was electricity whose properties were the same as the one great fluid with which all of life was pervaded. His real people accumulated it through mental and physical exercises by resembling yoga, right? And that's a reoccurring kind of thing here, where they uh, where they do things that are like yoga, or they transfer their body energies. A lot of these people abstain from like sexual activity or certain food because they believe that their energies are better uh, honed if they do these things. Um, we did have an image in a few streams ago of the people who do TM, transcendental meditation, who, with great effort, they say that they fly, but really it's just them hopping in the air in a yoga position. So the Vril Society in Berlin apparently sought connection with the supernatural beings in the center of the world, um, and practiced the techniques which would eventually strengthen their mastery of divine energy so that they would have power over others and over events. They believed this attempt at mastery was the only thing which gave purpose to existence. Any other activity was meaningless. One day, when the world was transformed, the beings in the center of the earth would reemerge and form an alliance with those initiates who had succeeded in adequately preparing themselves. In Berlin, Vril Society, or sorry, the Berlin Vril Society was in close contact with an English group known as the Golden Dawn. So we have a little bit of Golden Dawn action today, which was for a time headed by the Satanist Aleister Crowley. Here's a famous image of Mr. Crowley, and counted among its members such illustrious people as the poet William Butler Yeats. So here's Yeats, and I've included his poem, The Second Coming, which maybe I'll read later, I don't know, but I always find that interesting about Yeats. The Golden Dawn Society created an even more exclusive inner group than its competitors, the Theosophists, with admission by invitation only, ruled by secret chiefs who were discarnate spirits existing only in the astral plane, the practice of ritual magic, and the use of meeting rooms unknown to the outer order members. Such elitism made it the prototype of other magical groups throughout the continent. The swastika was a key symbol to the Golden Dawn, as it had been to Madame Blavatsky. She had incorporated it into a mystical brooch which she wore. Aleister Crowley had written about it in a tract published in 1910, and he later claimed that the Nazis had stolen the sacred swastika from him. I always love the infighting of these groups. Haushofer returned to his native country in 1912 and advanced to the rank of general in World War I. So we'll go back up to him. Let's look at him in Japan. Here we go. He developed a reputation for clairvoyance, predicting, according to Powell's, quote, the hour when the enemy would attack and the places where the shells would fall, storms and political changes in countries about which he knew nothing. Rudolf Hess was made his camp. It was to remain a lasting relationship. Hess often referred to his old commander as a secret chief. Yeah, so I'm really wondering, my conspiracy tinfoil hat brain thinks that like the Haushofer really just wanted to be this sort of secret puppet master, and perhaps was interested in making these people fall. Anyway, Haushofer, the geopolitician, is a much more familiar and comprehensible figure than Haushofer, the secret chief. With his Roman nose and patrician bearing, he had an imposing professor, or he made an imposing professor at war's end. He had already distinguished himself in formulating ideas which were well received by the nationalists and pan-Germans. At the University of Munich, he taught that war was the father of all things, and that Japan and Germany had a common destiny to appropriate more living space from other nations. He moved quite easily from military affairs to geopolitical statecraft, making good use of his Far Eastern travels. Munich, the center of revolutionary conspiracies, was the perfect intellectual climate for the father of geopolitics. His disciples and pupils slavishly followed his theories and style and evolved a strategy of German world conquest which presently had a unique opportunity of fulfillment. His most famous disciple was Rudolf Hess. He followed Haushofer to the University of Munich and sat at his feet, ardently drinking in the pseudoscientific political theories. He was a frequent visitor to the Haushofer home. Mrs. Haushofer was kind enough to give him English lessons, but the professor described his pupil with merciless accuracy. Quote, he was one student among others, not particularly gifted. Wow, burn, of slow intellectual grasp and dull in his work. So I think he found a perfect patsy in Hess, as we'll see later in this chapter. He sends him to England and he was humiliated there. He was very dependent on emotions and passionately liked to pursue fantastic ideas. He was only influenced by arguments of no importance at the very limits of human knowledge and superstition. He also believed in the influence of the stars on his personal and political life. I was always disconcerted by the expression of his clear eyes, which had something of a I can never say this word, somnambulistic about it. I think he thought he was stupid, basically, in so many words. Presumably, the professor was able to effect a change in his student because he later claimed that it was only Hess who really understood his theories. Yeah, he found a perfect cult member. On Haushofer's visits to Landsberg, his geopolitical theories were eagerly discussed by all three men and incorporated into Mein Kampf. Hess always remained loyal to both masters. Um, I love this picture with the lederhosen. So we have Hitler uh, with Hess and other conspirators. Let's see what's going on in the chat here. You have trouble opening the Outlook. Okay. Um, that would hurt landing on your butt in the yoga position. Yeah, I've shared this image before, but TM meditation, flying, like they really believe that they can fly, but it's really just them hopping up in the air. Here's an image of that. And David Lynch was also really into TM, and they opened a whole center, I think, in India, and it still remains pretty empty to this day. It seemed like one heck of a money laundering operation. Um, let's see what else is going on here. Oswald says, I always thought of turning on the widening. Oh yeah, okay. The second coming. When you see turning point. Ah, interesting. Yeah, maybe we'll read the second coming later in the stream. I don't know. It's an interesting poem. Yeats was very interesting. Yeah, they've got their beer and brats. TM Institute or too much information. Too much bad information. Um, thought it was fake and gay. Yeah, it seems like a scam to me. All right, let me take a sip of my iced tea. Yeah, those speeches that particular speech that Stephen Miller gave at that memorial was it was a pretty reminiscent of some Nazi beliefs. Yeah, Stephen Miller's speech was kind of creepy. It was a little creepy. I caught it later. I don't try to watch those things. Um, they're too weird. It's all too weird. I mean, there's so much weirdness surrounding that whole thing that could be a live stream in itself. Where was I here? So, as for Hitler, he was released first and wailed to Hamfenstegnell about Hess. Ach, mein Rudi, mein Hersel. Isn't it appalling to think he's still there? The common experience at Landsberg may have sealed a mystical brotherhood between the two men. They trauma bonded. Both Hitler and Hess were practiced in occult exercises. In the relatively isolated conditions of their prison room, they could have surrendered to the grand work of calling forth untapped powers in themselves. Hanfenstegnell believed that Hitler's mind had become impregnated with the limited doctrines of the Hess-Haushofer coterie, and that Hess had contributed to his gradual divorce from reality with the inception of the Führer cult. Before the putsch, Hal was just an old Austrian custom, which the Nazis had appropriated as a way of saying good day. After putsch, party people Heil Hitlered as a sort of password. Hess kept his job as secretary on his return from prison, only now it was as secretary of the Nazi Party. After 1932, when the Nazis came to power, he made deputy leader, second in command under Hitler. He controlled the central political organization of the party, supervised and coordinated policy throughout Germany, and was in charge of at least 19 departments of the government. He was not popular with the other party people. Karl Luedecke refers to him as a notorious homosexual and claims he was known as Fraulein Anna. And I'll just go ahead and put that image of the cross-dressing Nazis there again. He had married at Hitler's suggestion, and according to Goebbels' wife, for years, Frau Hess announced that they were about to have a child because some prophet had foreseen it. They consulted cartomancers, astrologers, and other magicians, who urged on them combinations of drinks and potions, until in the end a son was born. To commemorate the occasion, all of the district leaders were urged to make an offering of a sack of earth for their respective districts. Wild. The earth was poured under the baby's cradle as a symbol of his beginnings on German soil. As district leader of Berlin, Goebbels speculated on whether he ought to have sent a Berlin paving stone. Hess was a man hungry for faith and ready to place it in pseudosciences like astrology, homeopathy, and every manner of divination. His fate was ruled entirely by the stars, by the pronouncements of soothsayers, by animal magnetism, the swings of pendulums, and terrestrial radiations. Demons had a terrible reality for him. Hanfenstegnell says that Hess was considered, quote, highly peculiar and went in for vegetarianism, nature cures, and other weird beliefs. It got to the point where he would not go to bed without testing a divining rod whether there was any subterranean watercourses which conflicted with the direction of his couch. His wife used to complain, I have as much experience out of our marriage as a candidate for confirmation. Himmler's Finnish physiotherapist, Dr. Felix Kirsten, recalls finding Hess in bed under a huge magnet swinging over him from the ceiling. There were 12 other magnets under his bed to draw harmful substances out of his body and restore his strength. It kind of reminds me of this sort of New Age practice of what they call grounding. These people put grounding elements under their beds, or you could just go stick your feet in the dirt for a few hours, and that's supposed to like help you with your strength and your mental acuity. Still, Hess was a valuable man to the party, probably for the reasons stated in a character study published in Das Reich. Hess can be silent and keep secrets. Meanwhile, Hess's original master, Haushofer, the geopolitician, was soon transformed into elder statesman. He was made president of the German Academy and of the People's Organization for Germans Living Abroad, and became an important member of the Academy of German Law, which originated the legislation binding on conquered countries. Most impressive of all was his job as director of the Institute for Geopolitics of the University of Munich. After Hitler came to power, he saw to it that Haushofer received unlimited funds for the expansion of his institute. His was the head which conceived of the plan by which Germany was to conquer the world. So I really think that, I don't think a lot of people look at him, at Haushofer, and know that what his influence was. And I guess my theory after reading this chapter is that he set them up for failure. Anyway, let's continue. He had long believed that Germany would give birth to a leader who would rule the earth, and astrological predictions had convinced him that this leader would accomplish his mission in alliance with Japan. He often had premonitions upon which he acted. He convinced Hitler that the Institute must find out everything about its enemies, strengths, weaknesses, impending famine, religious sensibilities, the personalities and tastes of officials, the morals and corruptibility of even minor bureaucrats, the views of opinion makers. And so I wrote here, this was a precursor to modern intelligence operations. To collate, sift through, and interpret all this material on every country in the world, Haushofer enlisted a staff of more than 1,000 students, historians, economists, statisticians, military strategists, psychologists, meteorologists, physicists, geographers, and other specialists working in Germany and abroad. The researches apparently paid off. When, in 1938, the General Staff was worried that France would mobilize if Germany invaded Czechoslovakia, Haushofer assured them that it neither could nor would. He turned out to be right. He argued that Poland would be conquered in 18 days. The military disagreed. They feared their armored trucks would bog down in the Polish mud. Haushofer said it was not likely to rain. It did not. The General Staff didn't believe Germany should invade Norway. Haushofer prophesied that it would be easy. The military wanted to invade France when the war started. Haushofer urged that they wait until German propaganda had made its full impact on the people. He also dictated when the campaigns in Africa and the Balkans would begin. It was his idea that the Nazis make temporary friends with Russia, despite widespread anxiety about collaborating with the communists. He wooed Latin America for its usefulness against America. The Nazis tried to keep foreign investigators from finding out how elaborate their new geopolitical machine was. They deliberately led outsiders to believe that they were not themselves taking it seriously, and the deception worked, right? And that's where we see the occult kind of practice of not letting everyone in on the man behind the curtain, so to speak. Depreciatory remarks were made about Haushofer's use of such phrases as the demonic beauty of geopolitics and the Nordic Japanese and the almost telepathic sensitivity of oceanic nations to foreign dangers. Time called his theory one of history's greatest hoaxes, a vast nonsuch of propaganda for luring Germans to the idea of world domination. Mysticism, race theories, phony cultural conceptions. But some observers believe that Haushofer's thinking dominated Hitler's. Even American thought was influenced, said Hans W. Weigert in Foreign Affairs, July 1942, quote, "The highest eulogy as a a political writer could earn was to be called the American Haushofer. Colleges all over the country hurried to organize institutes of geopolitics. Right, so here is the godfather, really, of geopolitics and intelligence operations. And we don't hear much about him. Let me take another sip here and see what you guys are saying, if anything. Hmm. Um, right, an adventist, always looking for end times, all, um, and how they're going to kill the Sabbath keepers. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I, my motto is stay safe and don't join a death cult. Oh yeah, Stephen Miller, the guy. Stephen Miller. He's the what is his job now? All right, let's just look up Stephen Miller for clarification here. Um, God, he's yeah, he looks like this guy. um, so he is now the White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. And his speech at that memorial service was a little creepy. Just a little, just a tad creepy. Yeah, Hess sounds crazy. Uh, but anyway, let us continue with reading this chapter. We're almost finished. So he became the geopolitical advisor to Japan, and his house was the meeting place for Japanese diplomats to come talk over their alliance with German diplomats. His eldest son, Albrecht, was also a geopolitician and occupied the chair of political geography at the University of Berlin. And so I have a picture of him. There he is. And he's an interesting figure as well. He worked closely with the Foreign Office and was made Joachim von Ribbentrop's assistant. Excuse me. Father and son kept close contact with British members of the upper class Golden Dawn people, according to John Michael Angbert, a French writer in occultism. Once war broke out, though, there was no longer any way to communicate. The elder Haushofer used his influence with Hess to try to convince Hitler to make peace with England. The same mystical thinking which advised the German army to enlarge the living space of the Third Reich, quote, by moving out from a powerful territorial hub and by accomplishing this conquest progressively step by step, following the accelerating movement of a spiraling clockwise rotation, end quote, urged Hess in the spring of 1941 to embark on an adventure which was to make him the most ridiculous figure in the Third Reich. The Haushofers had planned for some time a personal meeting between Hess and the Duke of Hamilton, a good friend of Albrecht's. The Duke had the ear of the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, and George the Fourth, or is it fifth? VI. Sixth? No, it's six, right? VI. Oh my goodness. I can never read Roman numerals. If he could be instrumental in passing on a German peace proposal, it would be worth risking a secret rendezvous. The elder Haushofer told Hess that he had two dreams on separate occasions, or two separate occasions. In one, Hess flew a plane to an important destination. In another, Hess walked along the tartan tapestried halls of a splendid castle. The Duke of Hamilton happened to be Scottish. 24 years later, Haushofer's premonitions had been celebrated for their accuracy. Hess was now ready to fly whenever the stars were ready. He took off for Scotland alone on May 10th, 1941, in a Messerschmitt, Schmidt, I guess it's a plane that had been especially designed for him. with just a few possessions, including visiting cards for each of the Haushofers, an assortment of homeopathic pills, a small hypodermic syringe, and a letter addressed to the Duke. This is like this is like if Alex Jones sent somebody with a bunch of his supplements. Um, Whether or not Hitler knew his plans, it was not the specific date of his departure, if not the specific date of his departure, is still a matter of hot debate. Hess landed in Scotland, but that was the only part of the trip which went as he and the Haushofers would have expected. The British government did not leap at his peace offer. Wow, surprise. um, the German government had to denounce him as mentally deranged, which caused it quite a bit of embarrassment, since Hess had been in a position of authority with no one questioning his sanity. Hess remained an uncomfortable subject in both countries. British cabinet ministers sealed their lips so tightly that one Londoner quipped, "Never has so much been kept from so many by so few." The British would not allow Hess to go home, warning that he would be done in by his compatriots if he did. Hess sent Professor Haushofer a birthday greeting. Quote, "Do not worry over me. You, less than anyone, need do this. That my present situation is not exactly agreeable goes without saying, but in time of war we have to put up with many things that are not agreeable. Let the waves like thunder break, be your very life at stake. May you crash or may you land, ere as your own pilot stand. That I crashed is not to be denied, and it is equally certain that I was my own pilot. In this matter I have nothing with which to reproach myself. It was I who took the controls. You know as well as I do that the compass which guides our affairs is influenced by forces that are infallible, even when we know them not. May those forces be favorable to you in the years to come." In the event, the forces proved no more favorable to Professor Haushofer than to Hess himself. Not only were hospitals and streets named Hess ostentatiously changed after his unsuccessful attempt to end the war, but there was a wholesale routing of astrologers, seers, mediums, and nature therapists. Hess, meanwhile, grew increasingly paranoid. He was being hypnotized by the Jews, he complained. Furthermore, so were Churchill, Secretary of State Anthony Eden, and the King of Italy. Karl and Albrecht Haushofer fell from grace. A letter from Martin Bormann to Alfred Rosenberg, dated June 17, 1942, suggests that the National Socialist Monthly gave the professor too much publicity and that this should not happen in the future. Albrecht Haushofer participated in a coup d'etat against Hitler on July 20th, 1944. And I do have like a little thing that I found when I was looking into him. So here's Albrecht Haushofer, who wrote sonnets while confined in a Nazi prison in Berlin during the last months of World War II. His arrest resulted from his indirect involvement in the resistance movement, which culminated with the July 20th, 1944 attempt on Hitler's life. From 1933 to his arrest, Haushofer was directly and indirectly involved in work at overthrowing Hitler's regime and forming a new government. Through his father's friend, Rudolf Hess, and Haushofer was unofficially appointed in 1933 to the Foreign Office under Ribbentrop. His effect on German government policies was, however, nil. In 1937, he left the Foreign Office and devoted himself to his professorial duties at the University of Berlin. His activities with the resistance movement under the leadership of Johannes Popitz began during these years. The failure of the July 1944 coup led to the immediate arrest of all those who were at least suspected. In the least suspected. Haushofer fled to Bavaria, where he successfully avoided detection and arrest until early December 1944. He was murdered in 1945 on April 23rd by the Nazis. So if you want to learn more, I believe this image board is available for you, and you can click on the abstract that I found that from. So he was Karl, so his father, right? This guy was sent to Dachau, Albrecht to Moabite prison. Before his execution, Albrecht composed 80 sonnets entitled Sonnets from Moabite, some of which have been or become renowned. The collection was in his hands when he was shot on a street in Prussia. Sonnet 39 is called Guilt. Quote, I should have seen my duty sooner, and should have dared with louder voice to name as evil the thing my judgment knew is evil, but held too long unspoken. I deceived my own conscience. I lied to myself and others. I early understood the whole sequence of the misery to come. Sonnet 38 is called The Father. And here's the poem. In Father's life, the die is cast. Once it was in the power of his will to push the demon back into his cell. My father held the seal and broke it. He did not sense the breath of evil, and out into the world he let the devil. After the war, an American was sent to interrogate Karl Haushofer for the Nuremberg war crimes trials, and he confessed that Hess had been his favorite pupil. But Karl Haushofer never testified, for he committed suicide in the traditional Japanese manner, just like he said he would if they failed. Right? Seppuku. Hess did testify at Nuremberg. The other leading Nazis believed his presence at the trial was a disgrace. He barely seemed to listen and often dozed. It was as if he were operating on another level of reality. From 1947, he has been prisoner number 7. So that's interesting because he was also in cell number 7 when he was initially arrested for the putsch. And we know that the number 7 is important in the occult belief system. At Spandau in Berlin, he practices yoga regularly. And though he writes to his wife and son, he says he does not want to see them because it would make the rest of his life sentence too unbearable. Again, this book is from the 70s, so I guess he was alive at that point when this book was written. His wife keeps a room for him in a mountain chalet, which she manages. And she says, my husband's mouth is closed. He cannot utter the final word about his deed. Though she has not seen him since the day he left for England, they are never apart, says Mrs. Hess. Quote, telepathy, astrology, and his letters keep us together. My husband and I are in constant telepathic contact. People frequently turn up here and that I have not seen for years, and inevitably in Rudolph's next letter there are questions about those very visitors. My husband and I receive and send to each other in this way. So that's the end of chapter 7. The next chapter is going to be about Atlantis. Always a favorite. Let me see if you guys have anything to say. Oh, VI is 6. I'm sorry, my friends. Oswald wants to know, have you ever come across the Munich Cosmic Circle, composed of the likes of Alfred Schuller and Ludwig Klogs, who weren't Nazis, but reading them today will get you pegged a Nazi? No, I can't say that I'm familiar with that, but it sounds like something that I'd be interested in reading about. I can never get enough of the occult and or Nazis or people who are adjacent to it. I don't know why. Just a perverse fascination, I suppose. Their occult activity probably paved the way for Nazi occultism. unfortunately. It's really interesting in this postmodern world, right? The post-truth world that everyone throws around this term Nazi when really they're a very specific, unique group, I think specific to this time and place. So I think, it's ridiculous inversion and it's not specific. Um, anyway, I think it's very silly. Terry says, all I got to do to get called a Nazi is say, I want people to stop stealing and smoking drugs on the sidewalk. I know, you fascist, Terry Strange. You want peace and safety for the hardworking taxpayers of your community? How dare you? How dare you? Um, let's see what else you guys are saying here. Thank you for correcting me. I'm very bad at Roman numerals. The original Jerusalem was in Scotland. I have in-depth proof. Okay, well, you can send it to me. Based. I'm not going to read that one out loud. Jason Louv has been streaming about Seven Eternal Truths, Order of Nine Angles, and Charlie Kirk. Go figure. I don't know who that is. I don't keep up with these people. The thing about once you look into Charlie Kirk and his wife so Charlie Kirk's dad was the architect responsible for Trump Tower, which is very interesting, right? So let's just do this really quickly here. Charlie Kirk. I'm sure that Wikipedia has a really, really unbiased entry for him. But basically, yeah, his father, where does it say? Where is his father? That's interesting. He's buried in Phoenix. Phoenix. That's not symbolic at all. Right. So here's, yeah, his father, who was involved in the construction of Trump Tower. And then his wife, who was like Miss Arizona, I think, at one point. This woman, her parents were also major players in geopolitics. Of course, it's not telling us much about her here, and in this Wikipedia entry. That's weird. Her parents are very influential people. Let me see if I can. I feel like I have it somewhere. Let's see. Where did I read it? Just give me a moment if I can find it. I don't know. Of course, it's a post by Nick Hinton. No, that's not it. There's one that like really explored who these people were. Just give me a moment. But they were very influential people. I can't find it right now. That's why I have to prepare shows ahead of time if I'm going to talk about something specific like this. But yeah, these people don't come out of a vacuum, okay? They're not just random people. Let's see, back to their telepathic communications were romantic. Charlie Kirk was the Kirk's soap of pundits, boring and ugly. I don't know. I don't have many thoughts or opinions other than like it's not cool to be assassinated in front of your wife and children. He seemed rather milquetoast as far as these people go. He seemed like a classical liberal, which I guess for some people is not taking it far enough. Catholic. So I'm looking for her her father. This is gonna make me crazy. I read something about who her parents are, and they were pretty influential people working in, I think, the defense industry, at least her father, right? So none of this is by coincidence. None of it's, you know, just random. So I think that's going to wrap it up here for me today. Uh, I did notice that at the memorial, she was wearing black and white, which I've decided is again, like an alchemical symbol of combining the opposites, white meaning purity, black meaning the void. Um, and she also had that sort of Catholic cross on. Let me try to find it because I feel like I had it somewhere. Let me see. Of course, I can't find it right now. Maybe I'll do a whole podcast on that, on the origins of Charlie Kirk and his wife, who they are in a sort of more specific sense. Um, I'm, Let me just scroll a little bit more here on my likes, see if I can find anything. Because I should have just bookmarked it. Um, anyway, I can't find it right now. Well, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Nazis in the Occult. Uh, and Terry, if you can, I'd love to come out to Portland and see you. Uh, and I love weddings, so I don't know. Just let me know if that's not too weird. I also think I tried to message you on Facebook, but maybe it's like went straight to like your message requests. Um, so without further ado, which is I guess is another one of my things that I say all the time, I'm gonna end this stream. That did not work out this year. I'd like to return to Japan and retire there, live the rest of my life there, but it didn't work out. I had a lot of setbacks this year concerning a lot of things, but I like to stay positive. I like to try to basically keep the positive energy going and uh and just be happy where I am if it's at all possible. So yeah, no, that didn't work out this year. I had something kind of lined up, but it wasn't ideal. And I'm becoming very picky about what my future holds. I really just want to feel like I'm part of a community and that I'm at a school that I like. And I don't like to speak aloud about these things, but I did have an offer to go to Uzbekistan, but I've decided to just stay here for a little while. And in fact, I'm going to a conference on AI on Friday, like a very small little thing, where Joe Allen is speaking. So I'm pretty excited about that. Yeah, she does. She's a very beautiful woman, a very accomplished, intelligent woman as well. Um, but she also had this upbringing where both of them did. Really, they were born to pretty wealthy, well-to-do parents. So, post AI conference stream. yeah, like maybe I don't know what I'm doing. It's kind of it's like a few hours from here. I might be staying there. I don't know. Um, but the whole point is really to like say hi to Joe Allen and maybe talk to him for a little bit. I don't know if anyone's familiar with him, but I guess he appears. This is funny. He sometimes is on the War Room with Steve Bannon. Um, but he has written a book about transhumanism, and he talks a lot about AI. This is his this is his book right here, Dark Aeon: Transhumanism and the War Against Humanity. So, and of course, he has Steve Bannon. You know what I find interesting about Steve Bannon that a lot of people don't seem to realize is that he produced a movie, and it was a Shakespearean movie. Hold on. I think it was Titus, and it's a really dark, bizarre film. Steve Bannon. Uh, yeah, it was. Here's a story about it. Yeah, Titus Andronicus. Like it was. I like if you've ever seen it, it's like a very disturbing um, interpretation of the Shakespeare play. Um, so that might be something you can watch later if you're interested. Um, but anyway, I hope everybody's having an awesome time doing whatever they're doing. And I will catch you on the flip side. I will be finishing this book soon. Maybe I'll put a poll in my posts if what you'd like me to read next. I have so many books I'd like to read to you. And bye. Take care. God bless.